Is everyone ready to get started? Yes. Well, good afternoon. I'm Dennis Cross, the Acting Director of Lifelong Learning, and I'm privileged to welcome you to the Institute for Honor Symposium. We're glad you're here. The Institute for Honor originated during the 40th reunion of the class of 1960 and the class of 1960 professorship in ethics during its 50th reunion. It was one of my career highlights for me to work with the provost and class of 1960 on helping review and define the uses and management of their endowment gifts, which we codified in a 2012 Memorandum of Understanding. The purpose of their generous support is to promote the understanding and practice of honor and honesty as an indispensable element of society, and acknowledges the importance of the honor system to W&L and the impact the university's values hold in the lives of alumni. The symposium explores the importance of ethics, honor, integrity, and application of ethical reasoning to addressing contemporary issues. The class of 1960 professor conceptualizes the program. Since 2002, topics of the symposium are dealing with integrity have included, among others, just to try to take all this in as I read the topics: corporate governments, moral choices in private and public lives, moral authority in the U.S. presidency, sports in America, the news media, the role of neuroscience in understanding how we make choices, the European refugee crisis, religious values and public policy, civil discourse, the Civil War and the ethics of loyalty, responsibility in the opioid crisis, and this year, food, housing, health, and education in the Shenandoah Valley. All programs have brought to Lexington international and national experts and leaders to help us understand and grapple with the issues. For those registered, the complete list of topics and speakers since 2002 is in your packet. In addition to supporting the professorship and the symposium, the IFH provides competitive research support for faculty and students focused on topics of ethical reasoning. For example, this summer, the IFH will support 10 individuals. Finally, the 6 class leaders who represented 1960 in signing the MOU should be proud that the symposium and their support are helping to identify the current issues where ethical reasoning, honor, and integrity are crucial in finding solutions. 5 of the 6 are living: Richard Cohen, Bob Fegan, Billy Schaefer, Dave Weaver, and Ray Wooldridge. 1, but the leader of the leaders, is deceased, Frank Surface. Let us celebrate these alumni and their classmates and remember Frank Surface with our applause. Those alumni really cared about honor and integrity. And now introduce Kish Perella, the class of 1960 professor of ethics and law. Kish.
It is my pleasure to be before you today. I have had the honor of directing the programming for the past 3 years, and this weekend's programming is the third in a 3-part series that explores corporate responsibility at 3 levels: international, national, and this weekend, the local. So in 2023, we examined the role of corporations in armed conflict and in humanitarian crises, a series of issues precipitated by the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Last year, we explored the nature of corporate responsibility in the opioid crisis and the intersections of 3 ethical traditions: legal ethics, business ethics, and medical ethics. And this weekend, we shift our attention to our own community. Shenandoah Valley, and how business sector can contribute to sustainable development locally. We are going to look at several really important dimensions of development. We'll start this evening by talking about access to food, and then tomorrow we'll start by talking about access to housing, access to education, and access to healthcare. And we have a range of experts who will help contribute to our conversations who come from our own community. To begin our conversation, though, we are going to anchor our discussions in the framework of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, an important framework for creating a better and more sustainable future for everyone on the planet. The UN's 7 Sustainable Development Goals cover a broad spectrum of critical global issues, such as ending poverty and hunger, achieving gender equality, and combating climate change. These goals serve as a roadmap to address the most pressing challenges of our time. So my hope is that as part of these conversations, we start with a global framework, but we really think about the relevance of that global framework for how we evaluate and assess development in our local communities. The topic of the UN Sustainable Development Goals is particularly significant now because I believe it was only just last week whereas the US denounced the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So it is definitely very topical, and it raises questions as to if public actors retreat from the space, who might step in, and what is the role of the business sector for helping to deliver on some of these important objectives. In closing the conversation, this weekend is more than just about talking about development goals on a global scale. It's about how we in our own community can take action, drive change, and make a meaningful difference to everyone who calls the Shenandoah Valley home. To start our conversation, it is my deepest honor to welcome our keynote speaker for this weekend, Ambassador Ertharin Cousin. Ambassador Cousin has had a distinguished career across the private sector, government sector, and now the nonprofit sector as well. These are some of the highlights of her amazing career. She founded and today guides the Food Systems for the Future team as president and CEO. As a global nutrition and food systems thought leader and advocate, Ambassador Cousin also serves as a distinguished fellow at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs and a visiting scholar at the Stanford University Center on Food Security and Environment. From 2012 until 2017, Ambassador Cousin served as the United Nations World Program Executive Director. During her tenure, the food program operated in about 80 countries with a budget averaging over $5 billion per year and a staff of 14,000 providing direct food assistance to more than 80 million people each year. With Ambassador Cousin's support, the food program team also identified, championed, and implemented longer-term, more sustainable solutions for global food insecurity and malnutrition. In 2009, Ambassador Cousin was nominated and confirmed as the U.S. ambassador to the UN Agencies for Food and Agriculture in Rome. Prior to her global hunger work, she helped lead the U.S. domestic fight to end hunger, including service as the executive vice president and chief operating officer of America's Second Harvest, now Feeding America. Her previous private sector experience includes working for Albertson as a senior vice president of public affairs. She sits on a number of nonprofit and for-profit boards, including BEAR, where she chairs the Sustainability Committee on its supervisory board. Ambassador Cousin is a graduate of the University of Illinois at Chicago, the University of Georgia Law School, and the University of Chicago Executive Management Program Finance for non-financial executives. She has been listed numerous times on the Forbes 100 Most Powerful Women list, as the Fortune Most Powerful Women in Food and Drink, on Time's 100 Most Influential People list, and as one of the 500 most powerful people on the planet by Foreign Policy magazine. Please join me in welcoming her to give her remarks.
Thank you. Very kind. Whenever I'm introduced like that, I always wish my mother was in the audience. Let me begin by thanking, of course, Dennis Cross for the warm introduction to the series and for a great lunch. He picked up the tab. And of course, let me thank Kish for her very kind and generous words and for joining us for lunch today and for inviting me to participate with you here today. I was reminding Kish that when I was in law school at the University of Georgia, I visited this university. And I got to tell you, I hadn't thought about it in over 30 years until I was sitting in the room. And I said, I did a moot court competition here when I was a first-year law student. Oh, my God, who could remember that? Not that it wasn't memorable. It's not a lovely part of the country, but some things just didn't stick with me, very honestly. As I said, I'm delighted to be here today. When you're focusing on the Shenandoah Valley, but concerned about what is also occurring globally, I appreciate that level of leadership. And so invite me down and I will espouse for you, because while we must focus locally, we must also acknowledge where we fit in to the global picture and recognize the importance of addressing the global issues as well as our local issues. Because as I've said to a group of women who mistakenly invited me to come and speak at their very nice Women Who Lunch Tea in Colorado Springs, that we can't build fences high enough to keep out those we leave behind. So it is an imperative that we move forward for all. But how do we get where we are today? And where are we today? And does any of this really matter? As we think about what is happening in Washington geopolitically across the globe, whether it's our reduction in arms and our reduction in support for NATO and the impact that that will have on global development, all of these issues are happening. Yet, at the very base of this, there is that life-sustaining work that is necessary to support food security for the entire global community. But why does it matter? And how does it matter? And whom does it matter to and for? That's what we'll spend some time talking about here this afternoon. So let's start with the Sustainable Development Goals that Kish mentioned. After the celebration in Paris in 2015 with the Paris Accord, where the entire global community finally came together and embraced the idea that we did have a climate change problem and that it would require the entire global community to work together, and we actually reached an agreement on how we would move forward to address that challenge. But that wasn't enough for the global community. We were feeling good at that point. So we joined together to create the Sustainable Development Goals. And unanimously, the entire global community came together to support those 17 very ambitious goals, including ending poverty and goal 2 of ending hunger. And we said we'd do it all by 2030. But then the question became from the food security community, the how were we going to get there? And so 2 years in 2019, all 190 countries came together for the UN Food System Summit, but only 130 of those countries actually agreed to develop pathways for the how they would invest in and support achieving that goal 2 of ending hunger. And you say, why didn't everybody? That's a lecture for another day. Let's celebrate the fact that the 130 countries did. And at that point, the United States was part of that 130, just as we were part of the 190. But that was 2019. This was 2015. Where are we today? We're off track. We're off track in so many different ways. We're 5 years away from that 2030 goal, and we have 733 million people who face chronic insecurity, food insecurity, in 2024. We have 3 billion, actually 3.1, between 3.1 and 3.2 billion people who can't afford a healthy meal. Now, how many of you have heard we grow enough food is simply that it's a logistics problem and there's where the food is grown is not where the food is needed? How many of you have heard that? Okay, many of you have, if not all of you. How many of you believe it? Thank you, because it's not right. We do grow enough calories, and we'll talk a bit more about that, but we don't grow enough nutritious food to support the 3.1 billion people and their ability to access affordable, nutritious food for the diverse diet that was required for human health on a daily basis. In addition, we have 282 million people who are acutely hungry. And that means that without international assistance or intervention of assistance, it doesn't need to, they don't really care if it's international. But without the additional assistance from third-party sources, they will go hungry. And tragically, in that 282 million, there are 49 million people, as we sit here today, who are teetering on the verge of famine. And what drives those bottom two numbers, and particularly that 49 million, is conflict and climate. So you can almost guess where the 49 million is. But that's not a problem just over there. That's a problem here at home as well. We know that food insecurity affects some 47 million Americans on an annual basis. So says the World Food, so says the Feeding America. Feeding America is now our #1 charity in the United States. We have never given away, and we've never distributed more free food than what we're distributing today. But every single one of the leaders in Feeding America will tell you, you don't end hunger through the distribution of free food. You meet an immediate need, of course, and that is important that we meet that immediate need. We have the best social safety net of any country on the globe. And I can say that because I was the Deputy Executive Director of Feeding America as well as the Executive Director of the World Food Program. So I've worked to feed people both here at home as well as there. But those are Band-Aids. The Band-Aids. They're Band-Aids we need, but they're not systemic solutions that we require. And in addition to the 49 million, between 47 and 49 million who require food assistance here in the United States, 50%, and this number should bother and worry every single one of us in this room, 50% of Americans suffer from some form of diet-related disease. Obesity, and we saw the effect of obesity during the COVID crisis, where it was a comorbidity that often resulted, of course, in death to many Americans who contracted COVID. But we also know that diet-related disease is directly related to the exploding challenge of diabetes, heart disease, and some forms of cancer. Some would even add asthma to that list, particularly for children, fatty liver disease. We can go down a long list. But this number grows. It increases year over year. And it increases not just in its impact on the individual, but the impact on our society as a whole. Because while we have $730 billion annually in the United States in healthcare costs directly related to diet-related disease, we have about $1.1 trillion in impact from lost wages, lost productivity in our companies, lost days at school, the effects that has on our children. And again, that number increases every year. This is one of my favorite slides. When we think about our globe, we always think about we live on this big old place. We really don't. It's a very small planet, folks. And only 71% of all the land on our planet is habitable. Think about this now. Follow me on this. The rest is glaciers and deserts. And then of that 71% that is habitable, 37% is forest. That number's decreasing every year. And 49% is agriculture, because we're increasing the number from agriculture, the percentage of agriculture on our habitable land. As we lose our soils, as our population increases, that 49% number continues to increase. Literally 1,000 years ago, which is not so long in the time of our time on this planet, less than 4% of all of the habitable land was agriculture. And the majority of that land now under cultivation, that 51 million kilometers of land under cultivation today, has been in the past 3 decades. Okay, 4 decades, if I'm honest. Now, let's get even more interesting. If you look on the agricultural land of the 49%, 78% is directly related to animal protein. Not because the cows are on 79% of 78% of the land, but because, yes, they're on a portion of that land, they graze on a portion of that land, but we grow corn and soy that is only used or primarily used for supporting animal feed. Not just, and much of that is grown in the United States, and it's exported to other parts of the world. If I had a lot more time, we could talk about how China is increasing their imports of animal feed, while their imports of animal feed from the US and Brazil, while they increase the production of food in their country. That's back to that 3.1 billion people who can't afford a diverse and nutritious diet, because only 22% of all the land under cultivation is used for food other than grains, because 70% of everything we consume, not just what the cows consume, but what we all consume, is from corn, wheat, rice, and soy. You can add sugar in there too. What gets even more interesting as you go down. From our global calorie supplies, I just said 82% is from plant-based, but 60% of that plant-based is from those grains that I just described, with the other 40% of that 82% being from that more diverse part of the diet that we need of legumes, fruits and vegetables, to support the micronutrient diversity required. Last piece, and this is not about me picking on the meat industry, because I do a lot of work with the livestock industry. But we know that we can't continue to raise and manage livestock in the same way that we've always done. But we must, while we also ensure that there is more sustainable livestock management, we also need to increase the amount of diverse plants that we are growing. I spent a lot of time on that side of the slide because this is so important to where we go to ensure both human health and environmental health is an understanding of how we are using our land today. But we also need to consider what's on the left side of the slide as well. That's 70% of all of our fresh water on an annual basis is used for the food system. From production all the way through processing and human how we wash our food and use water to process our food at the other end of the value chain. We could spend a lot of time talking about the challenges of monoculture and what happened after the Green Revolution. Again, I am not opposed to the Green Revolution. Millions of people stopped starving. We ended starvation, the cyclical starvation that was occurring post-World War II in China and India because of the Green Revolution. But we also changed our food system to a much more industrial production system, harvesting much more corn, much more of those grains that I talked about, using chemicals and more water. And it has an effect, the effects that we've been discussing here, on the biodiversity, on the expansion of land under cultivation, which has an effect on our biodiversity, which has an effect on our forests, which has an effect both on our environmental and our human health. We could spend time talking about how the Green Revolution gave us those chemicals that helped us increase yields, but we overuse many of those chemicals. And the runoff is creating both an impact on our detrimental impact on our soils as well as on our waterways. The Mississippi is a great example of this today, with much of what you are seeing when in the Gulf of Mexico. Okay, I'll still call it the Gulf of Mexico for our conversation today. And the acidification there and the effect that that is having on that fertilizers and pesticides in the water is having on animal and plant life in the Mississippi. And I'm speeding through a lot because I want to get through a lot with you here today. Almost each one of these slides could be a 40-minute presentation on its own. In fact, when I'm teaching at Stanford, each one of them is a separate conversation on its own. But the food system, yes. Not only does it affect our human health by what we're consuming, the food system, as I've just described it to you, and how we're growing, emits 35% of all the greenhouse gases on an annual basis. And we often talk about the carbon dioxide that is emitted from the food system or the nitrous oxide that is emitted from the pesticides and fertilizer that we use. But it's what many of those in the advocacy community would say is the most damaging and challenging aspect is back again to livestock, particularly cows, and methane. And the methane that is burped, that is where it comes from, from cattle, and the effect that that has on our climate, recognizing that the effect is much more immediate and much more damaging from methane than it is even from nitrous oxide or from carbon. And I wouldn't, if I talk about our problems with our food system, I must talk about food waste. Because food waste, we have approximately 40% of the food in the developing world that is harvested is wasted, and between 30 and 40% of the food waste in the developed world is lost or wasted. Now, the reality is how it's lost in the US and Europe and Australia is quite different than what happens in the global south. For us, it's about consumer waste and retail waste. Manufacturers have gotten pretty good at reducing the waste in the processing of food. But think about how much food you throw away out of your kitchen, out of your refrigerator, in fact. You look in there and see the bruised apples and the strawberries with fur, and you toss them. In the global south, the food waste occurs from the lack of storage, lack of transport, as well as the lack of processing. So the food waste occurs between farm gate and consumer. So the problems that we are working to solve to address the issues of food waste are quite different today in different parts of the world. But the reality is, as it says here, that the combination of all that food waste would make if it was all in one place and we measured it in this way, food waste, the third largest producer of greenhouse gases on an annual basis behind the US and China. Just all the food that we waste. And indeed, when I was working for the World Food Program, we totaled, working with a number of scientists, the food loss on the continent of Africa between that farm gate and the consumer totaled more than all the food aid that we were bringing onto the continent on an annual basis. So we weren't bringing enough food on the continent to meet the food security needs of everyone. But imagine if we had our food assistance program plus we were able to eliminate the food loss between farm gate and consumer. You could begin to address that 3.1 billion people who can't afford diverse and nutritious diet. Again, let's bring it home and talk about the challenges that we're seeing on our farms right here in the United States from an economic standpoint for how the food system is affecting us. We know that in the United States, we have a policy that during the late 1970s, we told farmers, get big or get out. We began to, and not only get big or get out, but we wanted farmers to plant from fence post to fence post. And they planted because that was what we subsidized as a government. and I say it's not as what, it's what we subsidize as taxpayers, was to move from diverse cropping to diverse harvesting on our farms, from the mid-sized family farms to very large farms across the country. And today, what that means is that our fruits, vegetables, legumes are all considered specialty crops. And they don't receive, the subsidies that you receive for the grains, which receive then, and our large farms receive 85% of all the subsidies, though they only total 15% of all of the farms in the country. They've received 85% of the subsidies. So what does that mean for those small and mid-sized farmers in the United States? It means that we're losing more of them every year. They're older every year. And the majority of their income on the farm doesn't come from the farm. It comes from off-farm labor, usually from a spouse, and sometimes even from the primary farmer himself working off-farm. During the last administration, I'm not going to say a lot about politics here, folks, but I would tell you that with the IRA, a big piece of a significant amount of money in the IRA for agriculture supported U.S. farmers moving to more regenerative agriculture and providing particularly mid-sized and small farmers, young farmers, veterans farmers with subsidies that they did not receive before for how they grow and not just what they grow as they move to regenerative agriculture. And it began to make a difference in how people were growing food and what food we were actually growing, and moving more cattle back into the farm as from the large feedlots and large processing CAFOs. All of those programs have now been eliminated. And where does that take us as U.S. farmers as we look to 5 more years before we're going to end hunger and continuing depletion of our soils and our water, loss of our groundwater here in the United States? Big questions that we don't have time to answer today. So who is this really, who are we really saving here? What are we really saving here? What's wrong with this picture? When we talk about nature-positive agriculture, what's wrong with this picture? What's missing? The people are missing. Too often, when we talk about nature-positive agriculture, nature-positive food systems transformation, we are looking to support our air, our water, our biodiversity, but we're not talking about human health. We cannot have this conversation if human health is not leading on the why behind why we must have a food systems transformation. Particularly if we expect to solve the problems that I've hopefully had some success in identifying for you today so far. So I'm done with telling you about the problem because I believe we can transform our food system. That the sustainable transformation of the food system is not a belief or desire, it is a must-do. Because at the very base of everything that will determine our future as a species, our future on this planet, the future health of our country, as well as our global community, It is the sustainable transformation of the food system for human health, environmental health, and for the prosperity of all of the actors, from those farmers, small and large, to those investors who provide the capital to make it possible. So who has the power to make that change? When we look at the food system, it is not simple. It is one of the most complicated operations that we could possibly imagine. And so when we talk about this complex system and who has the power, we know that it will require a variety, a diversity of actors working together as well as in concert. Starting with those in communities like this: academics, researchers, innovators, corporates with much of what we know about how to change our seeds for drought, to make them more drought tolerant, is coming from corporations. And so we know the innovations that we need to move us away from ultra-processed foods and the long supply chains, and creating local and regional purchasing, identifying the opportunity for robotics and AI and other digital solutions that can make us a much more efficient food system. And if you look at all of the possibilities for change, where we know that science and research are part of that change, we know that our seeds in the future will come not just from technological knowledge using CRISPR and gene editing, but also from the exploration of indigenous knowledge. That each one of these challenges, each one of these tools, is what we call a diversity of solutions that are required. Too often, what we find is when we identify these various different solutions, that there are audiences and constituents for every single one of them, and they think their one solution is the right solution. But what we should know is that science, technology, and innovation will provide us with a diversity of solutions that we as a community of actors must embrace all of them. Because the one thing about that very complicated system that I just showed you is that so much of the answer is context specific. It's geographically specific. It's climate specific. And so we need all of it. We also need the policies, the government and policymakers, to get on board and provide the macro ecosystem, policy ecosystem that is necessary to support that diversity of solutions, scaling them up, providing the space for the way forward. Governments control through regulation, subsidies, trade policies, including tariffs, as well as higher safety, food safety, and creating not just the solutions on the end, but ensuring that they are evidence-based. And that's the evidence and data drive our policymaking. And that we have global answers that are nationally embraced and adopted, but locally implemented. And having too often, I'll give you a great example of what I'm talking about. When we talk about local and regional processing, whether it's animal processing or processing of grains and fruits and vegetables, we have global goals and standards that we want to, that we support to ensure the global trading system. Then we have national standards that will support what is allowed inside of a processing facility. But then we don't adequately fund the local and regional government implementation. And so you have a right to local processing, but you can't afford to actually build the facility to support that processing because there's no local authorities to certify. And that is happening right now as we speak in many of our counties across the United States. So we know that this is a significant pillar in the transformation process that regardless of what we develop, if we can't implement it because we don't have the legislative or policy space to support that implementation and scale, it won't happen. Which means we need collective action. We need public and private partnerships. We need the commitment of diverse actors to working together to support the way forward. And I put them all together because too often what private sector does and what public sector does happens in silos. And we wonder why change doesn't occur when it's happening in silos. We know that globally we spend $700 billion per year on subsidies. But much of those subsidies support the system as it operates today. And despite private sector's willingness to change their practices, they cannot if what they are subsidized and what is catalyzed are the practices of the past. So it demands that we bring the two together. But it's not just enough to think about public sector capital. We need more private sector capital flows into food systems transformation. Less than 5% of all of the annual climate funds that are invested flow to food and ag. Less than 5%. Part of the reason why is because many in the community can't agree on that first page that I showed you with all those different solutions. What are the right solutions? Part of the reason why is, of course, when we talk about issues like carbon sequestration and paying for offsets, the reality is the climate community won't accept agricultural offsets because of issues related to permanence of sequestration and additionality. How much of the offsets actually, how much of the sequestration of the greenhouse gases actually occur because of the work that is happening or that occurred. But we have a way of moving beyond those questions of, don't put us in the offset market then. Create a system where CPG companies and retailers can purchase, instead of offsets, insets as part of their supply chain to meet their Scope 3 emissions. In other words, we need to get creative in how we define what is available for capital for the activities that occur in our farms, if we want to move more capital. Because if we don't move more capital, we will not scale up those businesses, whether it's local processing, or the new tools that are necessary to support production on the farm, new feeds for cattle that will reduce the amount of emissions of greenhouse gases, particularly methane, from cows in particular. We talk about red seaweed as a solution. We've been talking about this one solution for almost 10 years. It's still not commercially viable yet. Because the science and the capital have not come together. Consumers have a big, powerful role to play. It was Wendell Berry who said, eating is an agricultural act. I had a farmer in Iowa say to me, I grow with what the customers will buy. I grow it how they say they'll pay for it. I worked with one poultry manufacturer who I won't name. We can talk about it outside because they told me I'm being taped. Who invested significant capital in sustainable poultry management. It was at a higher premium price point. Customers didn't buy it. What we say we want and what we put in our grocery carts is often quite different. And if we cannot move consumer demand, we will not transform the food system. We will not. Why would farmers grow more sustainably produced fruits and vegetables if there's no market? Why would the meat producers change to sustainable livestock management, which, whether it's harvesting agricultural products or managing livestock, the cost for change is measured in dollars. And the reality is those dollar costs are passed along because the subsidies don't support it from government. So then who pays? The consumer. There are some who say the sustainable transformation of the food system must increase the cost of food. Will indeed increase the cost of food. I argue it can't increase the cost of food. When we have 3.1 billion people who already can't afford a diverse and nutritious diet, do we make food even more inaccessible by saving our planet, our soils, our water, and even making it healthier? but out of reach. This is where that government and what we subsidize as Americans and what we subsidize as citizens of the planet, in whatever country you are from, is so important to ensuring affordability as well as availability of more sustainably produced food. There's a whole movement happening. Please tell me you've heard about it, called Food is Medicine. I love food is medicine. I'm saying this on tape, so there are those who say I've been a critic. But I think it's a great idea to get prescription produce, medically tailored groceries, medically tailored meals. Yes. But how about acknowledging that food is medicine feeds right into our broken healthcare system? Because we don't have a healthcare system, we have a sick care system that treats disease and doesn't prevent disease. And now we're doing the same thing with our food. So when disease occurs, yes, let's do food as medicine. Where we know we have a population at risk, yes, let's do food as medicine. But how about food as health? How about making a nutritious, micronutrient-rich diet affordable and available for everyone before the onset of diet-related disease? That's what this is all about. It's changing the system to move us beyond the Band-Aids. So we need all of it. We need the research, we need the policies, we need the access to capital, we need consumers, all of you, all of us, demanding something different and something better. But we need adequate partnerships because no one person, one institution, one corporation will do this alone. But more than anything else, we need imagination. Because if we can't see beyond our systems today to the what is possible in the future, to a future that is not the dystopian future that so many have embraced as the pathway that we are on. I get up every morning doing this because I believe that though we only have 5 years left to 2030, and that we are off track in so many ways as I've described, that if each one of us cares enough to get involved, to see the possibility of a different tomorrow, of see the opportunity and embrace the opportunity to imagine a future where every person has access to sustainably produced, affordable, nutritious food on a daily basis, that then it is possible. It is possible. Imagine it. So, what I did, because I imagine it, I need you to imagine it. So I asked AI to help me help you imagine it. And AI and I worked together to develop a little poem that I'd like to read to you. It's called The Harvest of Tomorrow. And on this computer, I know I can do this. Hold on, you guys are gonna, ah! Yes, I am a Luddite. So, I may need a little help here because I think I have. Yeah, what I need is my notes page.
I think, yep.
Will it let me do this? Because it's not showing me the whole thing. No, it won't let me do this.
What happened in the previous one? Sometimes when you go to this, we'll still display it. There you go.
Yeah, but I can't. That's only the, here we go. All right. That was a little commercial break for you. All right. So as I said, AI and I worked on this together. And it's called The Harvest of Tomorrow. Beneath the sun, the soil still breathes, a promise sown since ancient seeds. Yet whispers rise from broken lands where hungry mouths and withered hands bear witness to a fate we weave, a feast today, yet not we leave. Too many fields, once lush, now drained and dry. Too many rivers choked, while our oceans cry. The cost of plenty built for the day, our burden wrought, yet our children will pay. But in this dusk, a dawn remains, a chance to mend these fractured strains, to heal the earth, to heal us too, a path of wisdom, clear and true. A food system both just and fair, where balance thrives and all may share. Where soil is fed, not stripped and torn, and life is nurtured, nearly born. No poisoned fields, no wasted grains, no needless loss, no fleeting gain. A diverse harvest grown with care and grace that safeguards now and future time and place. For health is more than what we eat, it's waters pure and air that's sweet. The call is clear, the time is now to shape a future, to a vow. That what we grow and how we sow defines the world our children will know. A table set to nourish, not just dine, sustains the flesh, protects our planet where all actors thrive. So let us plant with mindful hands and tend with love, not scorched demands. The food we choose, the way we farm, can heal the earth, undo the harm. For in the soil, in roots so deep, this living promise is ours to keep. That's my AI. But what I want you to remember as you listen is Nelson Mandela, who I had the privilege of spending some time with, would always remind us that it always seems impossible until it is done. And the time is now for each of us to do. Thank you.
And now we have some time for some Q&A with the audience, and Lisa's armed with the microphone. So I'm going to just open up the floor right now for those who might have questions for Ambassador Cousin.
And let me start by apologizing. I was all over the place on this. This was a tour de force of everything that I often teach in a full semester. But it's very, very difficult to have a conversation about the food system on just one aspect. And so it forces me to do top line, broad, throwing a lot out at you. And so I hope there was something in there that captured you, that interested you, that you'll spend a bit more time learning a bit more about, because this was just touching the surface on a variety of different issues. Yes, sir.
So what about, oh, thank you. What about population control? And how does that relate to the big picture, the long-term picture?
Right now, the trajectory that we are on is that we will have between 9.5 billion and 10 billion people by 2050. And FAO has projected that we will need to increase the production of food, what we harvest, what we process, what we grow, by 50%, just to meet the basic needs of that population. The reality is that the population growth is happening in some of the poorest places on the planet, exacerbating the potential challenges. The idea that we need to also address population growth is not one, again, that many of those policymakers want to talk about. It's not one that many of our faith leaders want to talk about. But it is an issue that the women in these countries want to talk about and deal with. And it becomes important that as we look at Goal 2, the access to health care, and we do consider reproductive health part of health care, is another goal in the Sustainable Development Goals that receives even less funding today than food and agriculture. So I've given you the numbers. We know what the challenges are. Are we willing to make the decisions as a global community of where we invest and educate to address the challenge? I'll leave that one with you.
Thank you so much. With the U.S. backing off on some of the commitments that it's made, how are you seeing some of these other international institutions and even the private sector kind of step in to fill the gap?
You all ask hard questions. I'm a diplomat, and here's a reality. The World Food Program, when I was executive director, 40% of our budget was from the United States. FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, 20% of our budget was from the United States. When the United States steps away, that's 40% less at the World Food Program, 20% less at FAO. The private sector is not in a position to fill those holes. The question is, will the Europeans, China, Japan, increase their contributions? Here's a reality. While we're having this conversation about the food systems transformation and overseas development assistance here in the United States, there's also a conversation ongoing regarding national security. And I was sharing earlier that I was at the Munich Security Conference when the speech was made by our vice president. And the response from the Europeans is that we must invest more in our own domestic national security. And there's a lot of truth to that. But where does that money come from in those countries? The Netherlands, the UK have already announced that they're cutting their overseas development assistance. I expect that Germany, with their new government, will also cut their overseas development assistance. China has not suggested that they will fill the hole. And so there are many of these programs that we're talking about that require support from the international donor community that are withering on the vine as we speak. The good news, I always like a little good news, is that even the US has committed to humanitarian support so that the emergency food for that 49 million people who are on the verge of starvation, or the 270 million who require acute assistance, will continue to receive some level of food aid. But as we agreed, I hope you agree, we don't solve this challenge of the food systems transformation with humanitarian aid. We save lives, we don't change lives. And we have a responsibility to try and do both.
Hi.
Hi.
I wanted to respectfully push back on one of the things you said.
Love it.
When you say that part of the problem is what consumers are demanding, I think that's not a fair portrayal. Nobody wants lesser quality food. People are not seeking that in the market. It's a question of what they can afford. And so how do you propose that we go about making healthy food and healthy food options less expensive for people?
There's some truth to what you say. So I respect and accept it. The consumer demand for more nutritious food does require that we make fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts more affordable. And that was what I was talking about with increasing the subsidies for the production, the harvesting, production, processing of those foods to ensure that we can reduce the cost on the shelf. But let me push back on you. The data does show that consumers, even when given a choice of affordable, nutritious food, want what they want. And they purchase by taste, flavor, culture, before the decision on the decision of nutrition. What we need is to make us both right, in the sense that we must make less processed, more nutritious food affordable as well as available. But we also need to change consumer demand so that there is as much demand, and I am all about indulgent foods. Do not mess with my Oreo cookies. But it can't be at the center of the plate. And so working with families, individuals, young people, starting in grammar school, to help understand that we need a diversity on that plate that has more vegetables and fruits and greens than processed foods, than meats, but it can have it all in proportion and appropriate moderation. And right now, that's not the way customer baskets look in most communities, particularly across America.
Just a follow-up question. Do you think our new Secretary of Health and Human Services is the person to get us to that point?
Did I say I was not making a political speech? I have had the opportunity to meet with our new Secretary of Health and Human Services. And I could give you a very long-winded answer, but I think that the Make America Healthy Again movement is not a bad thing. It's not bad. What is interesting about the Make America Healthy Again movement is that it's coming from both the right and the left. It is less political than many in the country would like to admit. Now, my challenge is some of what is coming up is not necessarily science-based and evidence-based. And that should be a problem for us. Should we get red dye number 3 out of our food? It should have been out decades ago. And yellow dye and so many of the other things that are now coming that we've been talking about for a while that MAHA is going to actually move. But the issue of what is ultra-processed, we've put a lot of things into that bucket. And we don't necessarily have the science to support it. And so, hopefully, the new administration will allow the science to lead on how we make decisions about what we regulate and how we regulate it.
You talked earlier about too often private and public actors being in silos, what they do. How do we start to incorporate addressing sustainable food and bring it out of a silo? Because so much of this is, you're looking at underlying issues of food access or poverty or things like that that address how you get your food or what you have available to you, land access, whatever it might be. But how do we get this discussion about food systems out of its own silo and incorporate it into the broader government policy regulatory decisions?
That's what I need all of you all to do. This is the reality. Because here's the reality. Everybody knows what I'm going to say when I open my mouth when I walk into an office in Washington or in a state capitol. But what they will say to me is voters don't care. And until enough people are willing to make these issues that they vote on, as well as that we protest about or write to our members of Congress or our state legislators about, it will not rise to the level of a priority for our elected officials. I will tell you a quick story. An elected official I will not name, because you will know him, was on an elevator that I was on. And he said, "Hey, Ertharin, how are you?" I said, "Still feeding the babies." At the time, I was still working for World Food Program. And he looked at me, and he was on his phone. And he said, "Nobody gives a damn, right?" And then he caught himself because he was thinking it and he didn't know it was really coming out of his mouth. And he said, "I'm just kidding, right?" I said, "Of course you're just kidding." But that was what he actually believed. And I apologize for my language, but I had to give you the color so you get the full effect of the story. And every single day when I make and have the opportunity to speak to audiences like this one, my goal is that when I leave, you prove him wrong. that you care. Because that's when change happens.
Well, that was a fabulous, fabulous start to our conversations this weekend. So I'm so delighted if we can thank Ambassador Cousin once more for her remarks. And this is just the beginning. So we hope to draw from her insights for the entire weekend, and we hope it's interactive, and that we get to reflect on what she said as we think about what this means in our local community. And now Dennis has some important details. Logistics, what happens next.
So after lunch today, we went to the cupcake shop.
Cupcake Heaven.
She chose the muffin, not the triple chocolate, which I was pushing. You wanted to. You were resisting. Well, thank you, Ambassador Cousin, for being here. Thank you for the audience. For those of you who are paid registrants, we will have the reception and the dinner over at Evans Hall. For those who are here just to hear Ambassador Cousin, we hope you will come back tomorrow morning and listen to the panelists, because we have Stand Up, Tim Diet, Lindsay Perez, and Holly Ospey talking about health, food and housing, and education and health for three distinguished guests who are really local. So look forward to them tomorrow. Let's see, I think that is it that we need to talk about, but we'll have the reception and enjoy each other's company and look forward to seeing you tomorrow. But I've thoroughly enjoyed this, and I learned a lot. So thank you. Oh, yeah, one more thing before you set up what I was going to do. If you are a volunteer or a supporter in the local community focused on health, food, or housing, please raise your hand. Yeah, this is a very involved community. I knew there were a lot of volunteers here who make a lot of the work here happen. So thank you.